So, Brett, thank you so much for being part of our program and enlighten us from a Trump perspective about the election right now. Before we start, could you just tell us and the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure, soon. Well, thank you for having me on the show. I think you have a extraordinary opportunity here to help people understand what's going on in America. So I started out in my political career about 25 years ago, carrying bags, which is a nice way of saying I was the special assistant for a guy running for governor in Florida by the name of Jeb Bush. So this was back in 1993. He ended up winning and becoming governor in 1998, the second time that he ran. And I pretty much have been a product of the Bush campaign organization.
Thank you for calling them.
In 2004, I had the opportunity to run George W.'s reelection campaign in Florida for the Florida aspect of that, working closely with his brother Jeb, who was governor at the time. And then shortly thereafter, I opened up my own media firm. So since then, I've had the opportunity to be involved in pretty much every presidential campaign that's come through Florida. We have a media advertising business focused on campaigns, and I was the senior advisor for the Romney campaign, and then by extrapolation have been engaged in most gubernatorial and presidential campaigns in Florida since then.
And we're going to talk about Florida in a second, Brett, but basically from a European perspective. So this would be the European television showing us this. Trump will lose, Biden will win. Now, we've been talking in Pollster that this might not actually be so true. And I know that you have a different perspective on this because you work with the Trump campaign, so you see different things that the media report. Could you just enlighten us why President Trump actually might win the election from how you see it?
Sure. Trump is somewhat of a polarizing figure, and there's a general distrust among more conservative voters anyway for pollsters. In addition to that, what people fail to realize is that even though the United States is dominated by two parties, Republican and Democrat, there are millions of voters in every state in the nation that are unaffiliated. They're independent voters, and they typically are very private with their thoughts. They don't get involved in party activism. What you saw in 2016 is that Trump galvanized independent voters because they were anti-establishment. They liked his anti-establishment views. And so they came out in droves to support the president. And I think you're seeing the same thing now. You see an intense amount of enthusiasm at the grassroots level for Trump. This does not get picked up in the national polls, which by and large are dominated anyway by partisan participants. It's also dominated, by the way, by metro area respondents. Trump does better in non-metro areas in the country. It's very much an urban versus rural type voting environment that we're in right now. So, any place that you see, any state, whether it's North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, Wisconsin, these swing states, or what you would call target states for both sides, if Trump is within 5 points, you've got to give him at least 3 or 4. And so, we feel like he's running at either a dead even in the polls right now, or maybe leading a little bit in the polls. And we think at the end of the day that you're going to see that same surge of unaffiliated support that will come out for him.
This is very interesting, Brett, because you're basically saying there's a blind spot when it comes to the polls. Have you seen data that supports this, that you can see that actually there is a certain amount of voters that would support President Trump?
Well, we have. And what I would tell you is that, again, some of the polling that we see, watching this at various levels, are things that people won't pick up on when you're doing these macro polls of the entire country. The presidential contest in Florida is still very much a state-by-state contest because of the Electoral College. So if a pollster goes out and does, say, a sample size of 800 voters nationwide, and they pick up a trend line that Biden is leading, that really doesn't tell you anything. You have to look at the state-by-state comparison. So, we're doing some races at the legislative level and the congressional level in Texas, particularly in the Dallas metro area. We're doing some work in Florida in some of the key metro areas. And in those polls, when you ask about the president's favorability rate and you ask where people are doing, how people are feeling about his job performance, Trump is performing better now in those key swing districts than he actually performed in 2016 against Hillary. He's performing better against Biden. And in addition to that, he actually is getting ratings close to or higher than 50% on his job performance. So again, in these more concentrated polls in key swing areas where there are many, many independent voters, Trump is actually performing better than 2016. And I think that's a very good indication for him.
That's very interesting. And do you know anything about the blue wall? Will he be able to take that back, like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin?
It's a good question. I think that if I were Biden right now, if I were Biden's campaign, I would probably not be worried about Florida. I would not be worried about Ohio, and I would be parked in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. The fact that they are not parked there right now indicates to me that they may think that they have some bigger problems in those Rust Belt states than what the national polls indicate right now. So I know that you want to talk about Florida at some point. The reality is that if Biden is able to take away Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, okay, he wins if he takes away all three of those states. If Trump keeps one of those three states, in addition to what he won last time, he, of course, will remain as president. And so, right now, if you look at the polls, again, they're very tight. They're neck and neck in those three Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And those are going to be critical for the Biden strategy.
Just before we head to Florida, I just want to ask you, which coalition of voters, because I'm not quite sure about this, which coalition of voters will bring President Trump or make him keep his position?
So I know that this sounds counterintuitive because Trump is a very wealthy man, but his largest appeal is actually with lower middle class voters, particularly lower middle class retirees. Overall, their sense is that everyone in Washington, D.C. is corrupt and that they've gotten a bad rap, whether it's on their standard of living, whether it's on frustrations that they have over the healthcare system, the banking system. They attribute many of their ills that they deal with every day to what you would call the establishment insiders in Washington. So all of Trump's rhetoric over the last 4 years, his consistent rhetoric, continuing to beat up on both the Republican and the Democrat establishment in Washington, D.C., has given him that sense of consistency with those lower income senior retirees in the country. So again, many of these are registered as independent. They're neither Republican nor Democrat. But when it comes time to make a decision between Biden, who is surrounded by the establishment, or Trump, who continues to project himself as being anti-establishment, they'll break with the anti-establishment candidate.
Thank you, Brett. Okay, so let's look now at Florida. It's a huge state. It's something we always hear about outside of the U.S. The person that wins Florida will probably become president and all this. So obviously, it's a very, very important state to win. But as far as I understand, the state is pretty much divided into a blue category and red category, and then you have the I-4 corridor, which is basically where the competition is. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, you've accurately noted the colors, and we call the I-4 corridor purple. It's neither red nor blue. It's definitely the swing part of the state.
And how do you? So I assume a lot of your campaigning focus would be on this in this area. How do you see it moving right now? Which kind of messages from President Trump will resonate with the voters in the I-4 corridor?
So this aspect of the messaging is continuing to evolve, but you're going to see Trump over the next couple of weeks continue to make this case to voters in the I-4 corridor, and the case is over the economy. Look, Biden has really centered his campaign on coronavirus. He centered his campaign on Trump's personality. Of course, everyone knows Trump's personality. People have intense feelings about him one way or the other. What Biden really hasn't been able to give a good answer on, that he's trying to work on now with this whole idea of being the champion for the middle class, is he hasn't been able to give people a sense of comfort that his agenda is not going to be controlled by really radical left-wingers inside the Democratic infrastructure. Trump, on the other hand, has, I think, continued to maintain that free market principles work, that he's for the middle class, that he's for keeping more money in people's pockets, so to speak, helping them keep more of their paycheck, that he's been the economic champion for the United States. Those messages will pay off. What happened with coronavirus during the shutdown is that you had big economic engines in the I-4 corridor, like Disney World, Universal Studios, the cruise industries. They all shut down. People have been out of work. The highest level of unemployment in the state has been in the I-4 corridor. Trump had a very poignant moment the other night in his first debate when he looked over at Joe Biden and said, look, this guy's going to keep you shut down for another year. I'm going to get everybody back to work. If Trump will continue to focus on that message, he will maybe not win the I-4 corridor, but he'll do well enough to win Florida. And by doing well enough to win Florida, he needs to get about 45% out of the I-4 corridor. If he does that, he should be fine.
So he basically just has to double down on this Corona strategy that he's already implemented.
That's correct. That's right. Oh. That's right.
Okay, Brett. Very last question here: which voters are for President Donald Trump right now in Florida? Which voters are for Biden without reach from your perspective, and which one are in the middle if you segmentize them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I would say that the very wealthy elite in the state of Florida tend to be Biden supporters. More of your middle class and working class retirees tend to be Trump supporters. And then you have your inner city urbanites, largely minorities and others, who will tend to break for Joe Biden. So again, it divides very much along what I would call urban to rural and suburban communities. And suburban communities being more favorable to Trump, and then of course the inner city big metro areas being more favorable to Biden. And that essentially, when it comes down to election night, when you gentlemen start watching the returns coming in, pay attention to the non-urban areas of Florida. If the returns are coming in well for Trump in non-urban counties, he'll have a good night. If Biden is kind of keeping or maintaining a close proximity to Trump on election night in those rural counties, then it's going to be a good night for Joe Biden.
Brett Doster, thank you so much for bringing us into the Trump perspective from Florida. Thank you, sir.
You got it, my friend. Thank you.
Pollster US 2020 is made in cooperation with A4 Media. Find us on Libsyn, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or where you usually find your podcasts. If you like this podcast, please remember to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and remember to subscribe in your podcast app. Thank you for listening.